The COVID-19 pandemic has greatly altered the way many of us go about our daily lives, and this is also in part due to the new Omicron variant. Now, when understanding viral strains, it's important to know what exactly an antigen is, and essentially it's in the name. Anti meaning antibody, and then gen meaning generator. So it's any material that can make the body have an immune response, so that then antibodies can be created. When understanding what an antigen is, it's then important to make the distinction between antigenic drift and antigenic shift. So in the case of antigenic drift, this encompasses a change in amino acid sequences, hence contributing to a different surface proteins of a virus, meaning that there are mutations going on in the genetic information of this virus, changing the antigens. This phenomenon is what occurred to cause the different variants known as alpha, beta, gamma, and delta of COVID-19. But in the case of antigenic shift, this is a much more significant change because there's one subtype of the virus that mixes with the same virus, however, a different subtype, to then create a completely new product. This is the type of change that occurred in the strain to produce the Omicron variant. Although it's currently unknown how the Omicron variant came to be, there is speculation by virologists in China that this strain arose from a vaccinated individual who was chronically infected. It is also important to note that when there's different strains caused by antigenic drift, there's something known as cross-protection that may occur, wherein a vaccination that was created for a certain strain may have resistance towards another, and do provide an individual with immunity because some antigens remain the same, although there were genetic mutations that took place. However, because the surface proteins are so different in the case of antigenic shift, cross-protection will not take place. For the purposes of this video, I'll be focusing on the main 3 vaccines within the United States currently, and all of these try to replicate the spike protein of the coronavirus. So, the main difference I want to highlight between the 3 main ones, I'm going to be outlining Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. So in the case of Pfizer and Moderna, they use the same science. They use mRNA vaccines. And in the case of Johnson & Johnson, they use viral vector vaccines. mRNA vaccine technology is fairly new, but the way it works is that there's this strand of genetic information with code for the spike protein of the virus, which will be indicated by that red section right here. Now, this is all encased in a nanoparticle, specifically made out of lipids, just so that it could enter the cell, since the phospholipid bilayer of the cell will fuse with that nanoparticle. Let's imagine that right here, this is a human cell, and this will be the nucleus, and then this green portion right here will be the ribosome. This nanoparticle will interact with the phospholipid bilayer of the cell. Now, once this occurs, the particle will open up and the genetic information will enter the cell. It's important to point out that the human cell utilizes DNA to highlight its genetic information. Meanwhile, you're injecting mRNA, messenger RNA, into the cell, meaning this genetic information will go into the nucleus. Then from the nucleus, it'll produce a new strand or transcribe it. And then that strand will be translated into a protein through the ribosome. And then the translated material will exit the cell, and the spike protein will be expressed on the cell surface. This then gives way so that the immune response can take place. In the case of viral vector vaccines, viruses have this structure called the capsid. It comes in many different shapes, but this will be the one for reference. The importance of this outer structure is so that the genetic information can reach the inside of the cell, but there is DNA within the capsid. So I'll just highlight it this way. Slightly poor drawing, but it gets the message across at least. So once again, I'm going to draw another cell, the nucleus here, and then the ribosome here. In this case, the genetic information can enter the cell directly since it's going through a capsid. The capsid will inject the DNA into the cell, and since it's already DNA, the genetic information does not have to go into the nucleus. It can directly go into the ribosome and then be translated. Then the translated information once again leaves the cell and it'll be expressed on the surface of the cell. The immune response is activated and so on and so forth. Another key difference to highlight is that the J&J vaccine only requires one shot, while Pfizer and Moderna required 2 doses of the vaccine and also booster shots. Of course, J&J does require those booster shots as well. That's just to stimulate the immune system after some time has passed since you've been vaccinated. Pfizer has shown some success in trials. Typically, it's had an efficacy level of over 90% or so. Efficacy refers to a variable success in clinical trials. Meanwhile, effectiveness would refer to how well it works in the environment or in the real world. Of course, the success rate of immunity isn't 100%, much like other vaccines. Since Moderna and Pfizer use similar vaccination technology, this means that they'll have similar efficacy. There has been a disparity noted by the CDC, or Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Now, this difference is that the Moderna vaccine has exemplified a more steady immune memory. This meaning that the effects of the vaccine will last longer in your system, hence how effective the vaccine is. This quality has been seen to decline quicker in the Pfizer vaccine when compared to the Moderna. Nevertheless, once the immune response declines in potency, you can receive booster shots, which that is their function, to boost the immune system once again. The US has a mix and match policy, meaning that individuals who are eligible for a booster shot can get any one of the 3 vaccines to serve this function, regardless of your primary vaccination. When compared to its counterparts, the J&J vaccine has shown efficacy levels of typically around 70 to 80% in clinical trials. However, this does increase given a time frame of about 2 months. It can go as high as over 90%. Therefore, when compared to the other vaccines, it takes more time to have its effect. It is also important to outline the rare side effects that have been going on with these vaccines. This was a greater concern when these viruses were first being rolled out, especially since they were created at such a fast pace. In the case of Johnson & Johnson, there have been instances of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a neurological disorder, and there were also rare blood clots that were seen. It's important to highlight that these cases are in the minority since every decision has some risk involved. Once again, since Pfizer and Moderna are very similar in their technology, they've also exemplified similar symptoms. And for their rare cases, what happened was myocardial or pericardial inflammation, basically heart inflammation. But this was seen to lessen as time progressed, so the issue would resolve itself. Nevertheless, this is why FDA warnings are in place to assure that individuals may be knowledgeable about the vaccine they are receiving and all that has occurred with its history. For literary takes on the matter, there have been papers much like the one presented here by this individual, which outlines the importance for an updated vaccine. Now, this is the paper that states the speculation of how the Omicron variant came to be, and it states that Omicron variant has a resistance to non-mRNA or mRNA vaccines that makes it seem as if the strain did arise from a vaccinated individual who was infected. There's a second paper by this individual that speaks on the effect Omicron has had on the United Kingdom. This paper, much like the first, contends that the new variant does have some resistance to current vaccines, but there is still the artificial active immunity that generates antibodies, which have an effect on the virus. So there is a degree of protection, but it's not the optimal amount. Most of the paper covers how Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has dealt with the surge of the new variant. He encourages adults in the United Kingdom to get a 3rd dose of the vaccine. The only issue with this is that for a vaccine to be more effective, upping the dose isn't going to necessarily have this fundamental effect. A vaccine can't be expected to fully prevent the infection of a virus, especially with how fast COVID-19 vaccines have been produced. There would have to be changes in the makeup of the vaccines themselves. Applying more doses may not have the desired effect. This paper does also go on to state that there is a resistance from the Omicron strain against the body's immune response, but the artificial active immunity received from vaccines does at least still have a neutralizing effect. So prior immunity does help in decreasing the severity when one is affected. At least that is the current thought process. Although the vaccines do have some effect, this isn't to the same degree as if it were another strain, such as the ones that exemplified antigenic drift rather than antigenic shift, like the Omicron variant. A final 3rd paper addresses the questions many individuals have towards the effects of the strain. This paper outlines how it does spread much quicker than previous strains, especially since it's now the predominant variant in South Africa over the prior outbreak of the Delta strain. Also, there are increased reinfection rates. Although this may be alarming, the World Health Organization has said that overall the Omicron strain shows less severity, especially since there are less South African intensive patients across South African hospitals. This information is extracted by comparing the number of patients during different viral peaks. This paper does also provide a line from Jonathan Ball, a University of Nottingham professor of molecular biology, in where he mentions that overall viral killing has been reduced, but neutralization still takes place when vaccines act upon the Omicron variant. So the final question remains, how effective are current vaccines at preventing infection still remains to be discovered. However, from the information presented, it appears that vaccines do have some effect, especially in neutralizing the virus, but this is not the necessary effect for elimination. Nevertheless, these vaccines do still help in diminishing effects of symptoms and ensuring safety, as shown by the different papers. Since November 25th, 2021, Pfizer has begun testing for an Omicron-specific vaccine. Similarly, Moderna has also begun the same research.